Yes, okay. Hi, my name is Isabel Alonso, and I was until very recently the Heathland specialist for Natural England. I'm still Natural England, but a different job. I've been working on this report for the BES, but I decided to change in the last minute the title, or giving a subtitle to my presentation. So it is now Nature-Based Solutions in Heathlands, or why you should reconsider painting over a Picasso. We are aware of the background. The climate is changing due to increased greenhouse emissions, and we have seen already extreme weather events and the cost that this has for lives and livelihoods. So it's not surprising that local and national governments, organizations, corporations, everybody's looking now for options. And as our chair, Tony Juniper, said recently, it looks like the world is finally catching up with the science. So the UK government has a target to achieving net zero emissions by 2050. And only a couple of weeks ago, the Prime Minister about to cut emissions by 68% by 2030 on the 1990 levels. So there has been a lot of interest from decision makers and the potential for nature-based solutions to help us achieve these goals and to mitigate climate change. Nature-based solutions are attractive propositions, and a lot of people have launched into delivery. But we have seen already some problems, and I think David already mentioned them. So, due to poor planning and poor ecological assessments, the pictures on the right show a couple of recent examples where the top is a bog and wet heath that was plowed and drained and planted, and the bottom one is a species-rich calcareous grassland, which was also planted. And I think they are being now restored, but if not, they could have the result would have been worse than the solution they were trying to achieve. So when we have a proposal, we really need to decide if the land use change is the best option, or we can improving the management and the conservation of the current site is a better option. And I think one important thing with nature-based solution is that either for carbon sequestration or cutting emissions is that we don't start with a blank page or blank canvas. We've got already something there. But do we know the value of what we've got? And do we know, for example, if we are repainting over a Picasso? And this is what this BES report is trying to address. I thought at this point, especially if the audience include people from outside the UK and maybe outside Europe, we was to spend a minute defining or describing what are heathlands. Very quickly, they're a very characteristic habitat occurring in acidic and nutrient-poor soils. It's a mosaic, structurally very diverse, and it's characterized by plants of the family, the Ericaceae family, what we call heathers. They may occur naturally in exposed conditions like top of mountains and coasts, but most of them in the UK and in Europe appear as a result of forest clearance 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. And they have been maintained since then by extracting wood, biomass, minerals, and burning and grazing for livestock. They are still important. We've got very little left, but they're still a globally important resource here. And the species, some of the characteristic species have been decreasing drastically. So even something that's people consider common, like Calluna vulgaris or heather, is now considered near threatened. So species are decreasing, but they are still what we call the priority species or the species of conservation concern. Heathlands and moors are home to many of them. So if we lose the habitat, these species are going to be in trouble. And also that they've got a big value for people. This is just a quick summary from the UK National Ecosystem Assessment, and just to show very quickly the sort of services that heathlands and moorlands provide provision in regulating and cultural services. So they've got an intrinsic value. There's still some people who think that they were considered wastelands. Heathlands were considered wastelands for a long time, and there may be some people who still think that they are not so good. They are not productive. They are not the most biodiverse habitat, and they may not be so good for carbon. But with this illustration, I just wanted to show that they don't compare that badly with other habitats. So I put here on the top peat, and of course peat is king, so it's the highest store of carbon CO2, with 1,000 or 2,000 tons of carbon per hectare. But then the heathland soil is very variable, but it could store 300 to 400 tons of CO2 per hectare. And that's more than, for example, the woodland, both coniferous and deciduous woodland. And so it's important. And when we look at the vegetation, yeah, it's true again that the woodland will have more carbon because it's stored in the wood, in the trees, more than the heathland vegetation. But most of the carbon in the system, in the heathland system, is in the soil. So it's between 94, 99% of the carbon is in the soil. So it's a very important resource. This graph is made up of information from different sources, and it's just to show a bit graphically the implications, the impacts of some of the most typical interventions in terms of heathland management. So the maintenance for an upland heath, when it's just with light grazing and no burning, results in significant carbon sequestration. Whereas there's some interventions that could be very damaging. So, and drainage is the worst, both in uplands and lowlands. And uplands, nearly 10 tons of CO2 per hectare per year can be lost. For the lowlands, the range is much larger because of the different types of soils. But this is very big, up to 17 tons of CO2 per hectare per year. But then if we consider, for example, letting trees grow or planting them, that can result in emissions in both uplands and lowlands. So nature-based solutions for heathlands. Well, heathlands need to be managed to maintain the condition and the biodiversity interest. But in terms of carbon, the management could almost be considered neutral. So there's some interventions result in emissions, but there's also with the appropriate management, we could be achieving carbon sequestration. So if we consider what's the main thing that we need to address, would be restoring the hydrology, closing the drains and restoring the hydrology would be the best. Also, under high nitrogen scenarios, which is still unfortunately very common across the country, maintaining the heathland stands in a young stage, what we call the building phase, open and young, can lead to carbon sequestration, and also create more habitat from other land use, like arable land, or restore, for example, the bottom right picture, restoring from degraded heathland. Heathland has become grassland. If we bring it back to heathland, we can increase the carbon sequestration. Again, David also mentioned this, that there are trade-offs between the biodiversity goals and the carbon sequestration. So some people suggest that we should just leave the trees grow. But in the short term, we are going to be losing carbon from the soil, and the trees may take many decades to compensate for this carbon that we are losing in the early stages. Removing plantations that were planted on heathlands may result in carbon emissions initially, but again, thinking about the big soil carbon stores, it will benefit this block. And then grazing. Grazing is a bit more difficult one. There's evidence that it improves the habitat quality, but it can increase carbon emissions. But the best thing is to reduce or avoid soil disturbance to reduce the emissions. And as Brobfield and collaborators said in a paper published this year about the value of habitats to climate change mitigation in the UK, the most efficient thing is to address the carbon and the biodiversity as joint priorities, rather than sequentially or in different places. Just it's better to address both at the same time. So in conclusion, for Heathlands, this nature-based solution is a new field. There's a lot that we need to find out still. And for example, the impacts of management on different types of soils. The research has been done in very few areas, so it's more different types of soils. And also between the trade-offs, again, looking at the benefits for biodiversity versus carbon sequestration, we need to understand that better. And also considering the short versus long-term goals. So it's something that may look very attractive for the next 5 years, in the long term may not bring the results we wanted. So just to go back to my original message, and what I want you to take home is know the value of what you've got before you start painting over your Picasso. Thank you. And just some references from the report, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Isabel. That's an excellent analogy, and I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much.